I keep writing the date even though I know what day it is. It's a habit I developed when I started keeping construction logs, maybe 12 years ago. You write the date at the top of every entry, because the date is the one thing you can always be certain about, even when everything else is a question mark. So, Day 3, inside the reservoir, October 14th. I've checked the inventory twice today. I'll probably check it a third time before I sleep. Not because I expect anything to have changed, but because the act of counting things is the closest thing I have to a conversation right now, and I need something to do with my hands that isn't just sitting here listening to the sounds coming through the ventilation shaft. The sounds aren't constant. That's the thing I wasn't prepared for. I'd imagined it would be loud. I'd pictured a kind of continuous roar out there, the way a city sounds from a rooftop, that low urban hum. But it's not like that. It's mostly quiet, and the quiet is worse, because every single noise that breaks it makes your body do something your brain hasn't caught up to yet. A scrape, a thud, distant, something that might be a voice, and probably isn't, and then quiet again for 40 minutes, and then another sound that you can't identify, and you lie there and try to be rational about it, and you mostly fail. I should start from the beginning. Or not the beginning. I don't think I have the patience right now to go all the way back to when I bought the access license for this site, which was 4 years ago, which is where this actually started. I'll get there, but I want to write down what's in front of me first, while the details are still sharp, because I know from experience that the way things look and feel and smell right now will become the new normal inside of a week, and I'll stop noticing the specifics, and the specifics are what matter. The reservoir is 42 feet long and 28 feet wide at its base, with a domed concrete ceiling that reaches about 14 feet at its highest point. It's an oblate space, almost egg-shaped in cross-section. The walls are poured concrete, 80 years old, with rebar that I've tested and found still structurally sound. Better than sound, actually, because they used to build things to last back then, before engineering became mostly about reducing material cost per square foot. The floor was originally bare concrete too, but I laid rubber matting across most of it, partly for comfort and partly to deaden sound. A concrete floor in a space like this turns footsteps into something that echoes off every surface, and I didn't want that. The light right now is 3 LED strip lights running along the upper wall junction, on both long sides. I rigged them to a battery bank that charges from the 4 solar panels on the surface, which look, from any reasonable distance, like deteriorated maintenance equipment left behind by the Municipal Water Authority when they decommissioned this site 6 years ago. The charge is good. I get about 7.5 hours of full LED at that brightness before the bank needs to recover, and with October daylight I'm getting maybe 5 hours of adequate solar input on a clear day, 3-ish on overcast. I've budgeted the lighting accordingly. I'll run full light for 4 hours in the morning and 2 in the evening, and keep one strip at half power through the night. Enough to see if I need to move, not enough to interfere with sleep. There's a hand pump in the northeast corner that draws from a deep artesian layer beneath the reservoir's base. I tested it when I first found this site, sent water samples to 3 different labs under 3 different names over the course of 8 months, and every result came back clean. Better than city water, honestly. No treatment chemicals, no seasonal variation in mineral content. The pump itself is a converted well pump, manual, and pulls about 4 gallons per 30 pumps of effort. I'm using maybe 2 gallons a day for drinking and basic hygiene, which gives me a comfortable margin. The artesian source doesn't deplete at that rate. I could be here for years without running dry. That's a sentence I didn't expect to have to write, even to myself. Years. Let me talk about what's outside, because that's what brought me here 3 days early. The plan, when I made it 4 years ago, was simple in the way that plans are simple when you make them in a period of relative stability. I'd monitor the situation. I'd watch the news, watch the emergency broadcasts, watch the patterns of social behavior in the city, the kinds of things you can track if you pay attention. And when things reached a certain threshold that I'd defined in advance, I'd execute. I'd drive to the reservoir, descend via the maintenance hatch, seal it behind me, and begin the isolation protocol. I had a list of 7 indicators. Any 3 of them, simultaneously, would trigger the protocol. Indicator 1, Sustained power grid instability over more than 4 hours across multiple districts. Indicator 2. Suspension of emergency services in more than 2 zip codes simultaneously. Indicator 3. Official messaging that contradicted itself within a 24-hour period, specifically regarding public safety. Indicator 4. Visible military or National Guard deployment in residential areas without declared martial law. Indicator 5. Large-scale supply disruption, specifically of food and medical supplies, that persisted beyond 48 hours. Indicator 6. Border or transit closures at the state or county level. Indicator 7. A confirmed casualty count from civil unrest that exceeded historical norms by a factor of 5. I hit all 7 in about 36 hours. That wasn't how I'd modeled it. I'd assumed it would be a slower progression. 2 indicators, then a pause, then a third. Time to assess. Instead, it went from 0 to 7 like a light switch. One day the city was irritated and nervous and panic buying, and the next day it was on fire. I don't mean that as a metaphor. There was a fire. 3 fires. The one in Lakewood Plaza I could see from my apartment window on the 12th floor, and I watched it for about 4 minutes before I realized I'd been standing there with my car keys in my hand since I woke up, which was at 5 a.m., which was when the alert tone started. I'd been tracking the situation for 3 weeks before that. The first reports came out of Hargrove County, a rural district about 60 miles south of the city. Not much there besides farmland and a regional medical center. The reports were vague in the way that early reports always are. Unusual violent incidents, unprovoked attacks, several injuries, a few deaths, no clear motive. The county sheriff's office put out a statement about a possible drug-related cluster, which is what agencies always say when they don't yet have a category for something. I made a note of it and kept watching. Then it was Mill Creek, then Dunbar Township. The incidents were moving north, toward the city, in a pattern that any decent spatial analyst would have flagged as non-random. I flagged it. I also noted that the state health department's public communications made no reference to the geographic clustering, which told me either they hadn't noticed it, unlikely, or they were choosing not to mention it, which was worse. By the time Hargrove County was on the national news, the city's hospitals were already seeing cases. I know because I have a friend, had a friend, I should say, past tense feels necessary now, named Dennis, who's an ER physician at St. Clement's, and I'd been texting him periodic check-ins. His responses got shorter and more delayed as October wore on. The last message I got from him, 6 days before I sealed the hatch, was 4 words. Bad here, stay home. I didn't stay home. I didn't have a home worth staying in, not compared to what I'd built. I went to work on the last 5 items on my preparation checklist, verifying the ventilation filter ratings, testing the radio, checking the camera battery backups, confirming the food inventory one final time, and retrieving the last set of personal documents I'd been keeping in a watertight case at my apartment. That last trip to the apartment, on October 11th, was the first time I saw one in person. I was in the parking garage of my building, coming back from the reservoir after a final systems check, when I heard it. The sound. I didn't understand at first what kind of sound it was. You know how, when you hear something that doesn't fit any category you've established, your brain just goes quiet for a second, like a computer that's been handed an operation it wasn't designed for. It went quiet. Then it sorted the input into the only available category, something wrong. There was a man, a person, I'm going to say person, at the far end of the parking level, near the stairwell door. He was facing the wall, just standing there, not moving. I stood still for probably 10 seconds watching him, trying to determine whether he was drunk, whether he was having some kind of episode, whether I needed to say something. He was wearing a business shirt and slacks, one shoe, the other foot in a gray sock. His head was tilted at an angle that didn't look like a neck that was comfortable. Then he turned around. I'm not going to describe it in detail, partly because I don't want to, and partly because the details, the state of his face, the thing going on with his eyes, I've already started processing them into something more manageable in my memory, smoothing the edges, and I don't want to reinforce the accurate version. What I'll say is, I understood immediately. The reports, the footage I'd seen online, the things Dennis's last message implied. I understood it all in about 2 seconds, standing in a parking garage with my car key in my hand. I drove to the reservoir. I did not go back upstairs for my documents. I sealed the hatch at 6:47 p.m. on October 11th. Outside it was already dark, and I could hear, even from 8 meters underground, the low tone that a city makes when too many things are happening at once, in too many directions. I've been here since. Okay, that's the background. Now I want to write about the specific situation as it stands today, because that's what I'm actually sitting with. Day 3, and I'm already noticing things I didn't expect to notice. The first is how loud my own body is. I eat and it's incredibly loud. The way food sounds when you bite into something, when you chew, when you swallow. In my apartment with the television on, and traffic outside, and the refrigerator cycling on and off, these sounds were completely invisible to me. In here, in a space with no ambient noise except the faint hum of the battery bank, and the occasional drip from the condensation that forms on the dome above, I can hear myself breathing. I can hear the mechanism of my jaw. I can hear my own heartbeat if I press my wrist to my ear, which I did once, at about 2 a.m. on the first night, and it was the most unsettling sound I'd encountered in those 48 hours, which is saying something. The second thing is the ventilation shaft. I designed the system myself. 2 shafts, each 60 millimeters in diameter, running up through 48 centimeters of concrete, and then another 2 meters of packed earth, before emerging in what looks like a rusted standpipe near the base of an old drainage berm. The shafts are baffled, which means sound coming down them is distorted, and directional data is basically lost. You can't tell where a sound is coming from by the time it reaches you. You can only tell that a sound has come. Tonight, around 9 p.m., something came down the north shaft that I've been sitting here trying to identify for 40 minutes. It wasn't a zombie. I'm fairly confident of that. The infected I've observed on the cameras make a limited range of sounds, low vocalizations mostly, something between a groan and a gag reflex, like a person trying to clear an obstruction in their throat. Intermittent. They don't make sounds continuously. They make sounds when stimulated, when they sense something, when they're moving towards something. This wasn't that. This was a repeated sound, rhythmic, 4 beats with a slightly irregular interval, then a pause, then 4 again. Like someone knocking, like someone tapping a surface deliberately. I sat here with my pen above this page for a long time after I wrote that last sentence. It was probably nothing. Wind in the standpipe, debris caught in the baffle making an accidental rhythm. It stopped after about 3 minutes and hasn't recurred. I've been listening for it since. Probably nothing. Day 5. I need to be honest about the food situation, because I've been putting off writing about it, and I'm not sure why. Maybe because writing it down makes it concrete in a way that I don't fully want to face. When I inventoried the shelter 4 months ago, last formal inventory, August 15th, I had 22 months of calories. I calculated this based on a daily intake of 2,100 calories for one person, which is on the lower end of maintenance for a man my size, 5'11", about 180 at the time, though I've lost 4 or 5 pounds since then from reduced appetite and stress, which is a separate problem. 22 months, more than enough. When I inventoried the shelter on day 1, after sealing the hatch, I had 20 months of calories. Now, 2 months isn't a catastrophic discrepancy. I'd used some supplies in the weeks leading up to sealing the hatch, carried some things out to test equipment, left a few items at my office, probably miscounted something during one of my intermediate checks. There are reasonable explanations. The specific items missing are what bothers me. Not the bulk calorie stores. The rice, the dried beans, the oats, the canned goods. Those are largely untouched. What's short is 8 protein bars, one of the 3 sealed cartons of nuts, a partial box of crackers, a bottle of multivitamins, and, this is the one I keep coming back to, one of the 2 medical-grade LED flashlights I'd stored in the emergency kit. Those are not things you'd take by accident. Those are portable things. Lightweight, dense in calories and utility. The kind of things you'd take if you were taking them somewhere. I've looked at every surface of this space, every wall, every corner. I know where I've been and what I've touched. There's nothing here that I didn't put here. And nothing is missing from my daily use items. Just those things. From that specific shelf cluster, which I hadn't accessed since August. I have a headache that I've been ignoring since day 4. I'm drinking more water than I usually would, trying to rule out dehydration as a factor. And I'm taking 1 ibuprofen every 8 hours, and trying not to take a second one, even when the 8 hours isn't up yet. Tonight I'm going to go through the inventory one more time, very methodically, item by item, and compare it against the August list. And I'm going to find a rational explanation, because there is one. There is absolutely one. Day 7. The August list doesn't explain it. I went through everything yesterday. 5 hours. Every shelf, every stack, every sealed container. Cross-referenced against the August inventory 3 separate times. The missing items aren't accounted for. They're just gone. There are 3 possible explanations. I've been through them repeatedly. The way you work through a structural problem. You list the possible failure points and you eliminate them one at a time until you're left with whatever's actually true. 1. I misremembered or miscounted in August, and the August inventory number is wrong. This is possible. I'm a thorough counter, but not an infallible one. The problem with this explanation is that it requires multiple independent errors across several different categories on the same occasion. And my August inventory was done over 2 days, carefully, with a checklist. Possible but unlikely. 2. I removed those items myself during one of my visits after August, for some purpose I've since forgotten, and they're either at my office, at my apartment, or in my car. This is also possible. I made 3 visits to the shelter between August and October 11th. The problem is I don't remember taking those items, and I usually remember what I take, because I keep a running log in a small notebook I carry. I checked the notebook. No reference to any of those items being removed. 3. Someone else was in here. I live with option 3 now. I don't like it, but I live with it, because it's the one that fits the data. Someone had access to this space between August 15th and October 11th. They took specific items from a specific shelf cluster. They left no other visible trace. No damage. No forced entry. Nothing on the floor. Nothing disturbed. Here's the part that's actually keeping me awake. I built this shelter in secret. 4 years of work, and I never told a single person it existed. Not Dennis. Not my supervisor at the firm. Not my sister, who is in Portland, and who I haven't spoken to in almost 3 months, which is normal for us. Nobody. I went to extraordinary lengths to make certain of that. I carried materials in a cargo van with magnetic placards on the side that looked like a utility company. I staggered my visits to avoid patterns. I used different hardware stores across a 30-mile radius. I paid in cash for everything above $50. Nobody knew this place existed. Except, apparently, they did. Day 8. Morning. I was up at 4 a.m. because I heard something from the north shaft again. Not the rhythmic tapping from day 3. Something else. Closer to a scrape. A long, slow scrape, like something being dragged across a surface. I lay on my cot for maybe a minute after I heard it, running through the mundane explanations in priority order. An animal on the surface. Possible, though the standpipe opening is capped with a fine mesh screen that should exclude anything larger than a small rodent. Debris settling. Wind pattern. Condensation dripping onto a vibrating surface. I went through all of them, and then I got up and sat in the dark and listened for another 40 minutes, and heard nothing further. The camera system covers 4 points on the surface. Camera 1 faces the main hatch area from about 30 meters out, positioned to look like part of the old utility equipment cluster. Camera 2 covers the northwest approach along the drainage berm. Camera 3 is on the east side, looking back toward the access road that used to serve this site. Camera 4 watches the standpipe cluster directly. I reviewed the camera footage from last night. Cameras 1, 2, and 3 showed nothing significant. A cat at some point around 2 a.m., crossing the south edge of Camera 2's field, and nothing else. Camera 4 was dark from 11:47 p.m. to 4:13 a.m. Not blank. Dark. The LED status light on the camera unit was still blinking, which means it was powered and operational, but the footage during that window is black, like something was covering the lens. I've been sitting here for 20 minutes trying to decide how worried to be about this. The answer is very. The answer is very worried. The way you cover a camera without triggering visible approach is to approach the camera from a dead angle, the blind spot that exists in any fixed camera's field of view, and place something over the lens from the side. You'd need to know where the camera was, which requires either very careful observation of the site over time or prior knowledge of the system's layout. Neither of those possibilities makes me feel better. I've re-engaged the camera manually, and it appears to be functioning normally now. Whatever was covering it has been removed. I made coffee this morning for the first time since sealing in. I'd been rationing it. I have 42 servings of instant coffee, which felt excessive to burn through quickly, but I needed it today. It's bad coffee. I hate instant coffee, but I drank it standing up in the northwest corner of the reservoir, which is where I put the folding table and the 2 camp chairs, and it tasted like something real, in a way that nothing else has tasted since I came down here. I drank it slow, and I tried to think logically. Someone knows I'm here. That's the conclusion I keep being forced toward. Someone has been watching this shelter, probably for a long time. They've been inside it. They've taken things, and they've done it carefully, leaving no mess, making minimal trace. They're still out there. The camera coverage was deliberate, which means they were on the surface last night, and they're skilled enough at moving around the site to avoid the other 3 cameras while covering camera 4. They haven't tried to get in. They could have tried before I sealed the hatch. I was still making visits up until day 0. They didn't. Or if they did, they chose not to force anything. What does someone like that want? Day 9. Found something I should have found earlier. I was moving a water barrel to get to the filter check valve on the east wall, and behind the barrel, tucked into the gap between the barrel and the wall, about 6 inches off the floor, there was a folded piece of paper. I should be clear. That barrel has been in that position since I placed it here, which was on my 3rd visit to this site, roughly 2 years ago. The barrel weighs about 80 pounds full, which it is. I've never moved it. Nobody should have known to look behind it. The paper was folded twice. Inside, a small notebook. Not mine. I own 3 notebooks, and all 3 are on my shelf and accounted for. This was a composition notebook, the kind with the black and white marbled cover, water damaged on the upper right corner. About 60 pages used. I'm reading it right now, and I need to write down what's in it, slowly, because I want to have a record of it separate from the notebook itself. It's surveillance notes, field notes, basically. Notes about me. The earliest entry is dated April 8th, 2.5 years ago. The handwriting is small and consistent, left-leaning. The kind of handwriting that belongs to someone who was taught to write by hand and did a lot of it. The entry reads, "Subject arrived at site at 11:40 a.m. in a gray cargo van. No company markings. Carried 2 boxes marked HVAC parts through the maintenance access point. Was inside for approximately 2 hours, 20 minutes. Left via the same route. Did not appear to notice stationary observation from the berm position. Will return." There are 87 entries. They span 2.5 years, right up until... I'll get to the last few entries in a moment, because they're different in tone from the rest. The notes track my visits. Dates, times, what I brought, how long I stayed. There are detailed observations about the materials I was using. The person had some working knowledge of structural and civil engineering, because they correctly identified the ventilation shaft extensions I installed in June of last year as secondary atmospheric intake. Appears to be dual shaft with baffled termination. That's not casual observation. That's someone who understood what they were looking at. They also note things I didn't think were visible. The conduit run to the solar panels, embedded in existing drain line, insulated, approximately 8 mm diameter, based on surface profile. The camera positions, all 4 of them, correctly placed, with an annotation in the margin reading, "Camera 4 blind angle, approach from NNW at less than 15 degrees will avoid frame." Someone had blueprints, or they were very good and had a lot of time. The tone of the entries shifts around October 3rd, about 2 weeks ago. Up to that point, the notes are observational. After October 3rd, there's something else. I'll transcribe the last 3 entries here. October 3rd. The news from Dunbar is confirmed. It started. He's accelerating his timeline. Moved 3 food deliveries in the last week. Arrived twice after dark. He doesn't know what he's living under. I'm not sure how to tell him or whether I should. October 9th. He'll seal the hatch soon. Maybe this week. He's moving the last of the personal items now. I could approach him directly, but his profile, his building access history, his property records, his pattern of contact with former colleagues, suggests he would not respond well. He would see me as a threat. He might seal up anyway, and never open it. That would be the worst outcome. I need him to find this first. October 13th. 2 days after I sealed the hatch. The handwriting is less controlled here, and some of the letters are doubled. The hand was unsteady. He's been inside for 2 days. I can hear the pump cycling at night. He's down there, safe, or as safe as you can be down there. He doesn't know what the storage chamber contains. When he finds it, he'll understand part of it. The rest is in the documents, and I need to get those to him somehow. I don't have much time out here. The cleanup detail is moving north. I've seen the vehicles twice now on Route 9. White vans, hazmat rated. They're not here to help people. They need the site cleared and the drums accounted for. I'm going to try the signal again tonight. If he's monitoring the cameras, he'll see the flash pattern. If he responds, I'll know what to do next. That's the last entry. Storage chamber. What storage chamber? I've been in every part of this reservoir that I know of. I've mapped it. I built the interior fit out myself. I know where every wall is. There's a section of the floor in the southeast corner that I laid heavy rubber matting over because it was uneven. The concrete had a low point depression, about 8 by 6 feet, maybe an inch of depth variation. I thought it was settling. I smoothed it with matting and put the food shelf unit over it. I haven't moved that shelf unit since I installed it. Day 9, later. It took me 90 minutes to move everything off the shelf unit and shift it aside. The shelf is bolted to the wall, so I had to unbolt it first, which was a job for the ratchet set, and my hands were doing something I can only describe as not cooperating. Not shaking exactly, just slow and slightly clumsy, in a way that was unfamiliar. Under the rubber matting, the floor depression I'd attributed to settling is a hatch. It's old, much older than my installation work. The iron is oxidized to a dark rust orange, and the hinge pins are seized. There's a hasp on it, padlocked with an older model disc lock that I did not put there, and do not have a key for. The concrete around the hatch edge has been sealed, at some point in the past, with what looks like industrial epoxy, gray, slightly yellowed with age. The concrete seal has been partially broken. Someone has been at the edge of it with a chisel or a flat pry bar, working around 3 of the 4 sides. They didn't finish. The hasp is still locked. The hatch is still closed, but the seal around 3 edges has been cracked and lifted. Someone was trying to open this from above, from inside the reservoir, the same way I'm looking at it now. The shelf unit I installed directly over it 8 months ago would have stopped them. They left the notebook instead. I'm sitting on the floor next to the hatch right now. The iron is cold under my hand. I can feel the disc lock's weight. I've been looking at it for about 20 minutes. What's under here? According to the notebook, something the person outside calls the storage chamber, and something they believe is connected to the outbreak, and something they believe I don't know I'm sitting above. They're right. I didn't know. Day 10, 3 a.m. I couldn't sleep. I'm writing this by the half-power LED strip and drinking the last of the coffee I made earlier, which is cold now and tastes appropriately terrible. I spent most of yesterday going through the property records I'd saved to a hard drive before sealing in. I have a fairly comprehensive document archive. Property records, engineering surveys, utilities records, water authority documentation for this site, going back to the initial construction date of 1941. I went through it methodically, which is how I do things, and what I found has been sitting in my chest like a physical object ever since. The reservoir was decommissioned by the City Water Authority in 2017. That part I knew. What I didn't know, what wasn't in the records I'd initially reviewed, is in a supplementary document I found buried 3 folders deep in an asset transfer archive. Between 2009 and 2014, This reservoir site was leased to a private entity called Vertex Bioresearch Group for a period described in the document as environmental and hydrological assessment activities. The lease payments were made to the Water Authority. The authorization was signed by a deputy commissioner whose name I don't recognize, and the period of activity is described in terms vague enough to tell you very little about what actually happened here. Vertex Bioresearch Group. I've never heard of them. I know roughly half the major civil and structural infrastructure projects in this city over the last 2 decades. I have contacts at the planning department. I've reviewed probably 40 major site assessments, and I've never come across that name, which means they operated outside the normal project cycle, which means they weren't doing public contract work, which means whoever authorized them to work here did it quietly, and they were here for 5 years. Then the city reclaimed the site, decommissioned the reservoir, and put up the chain-link fence and the no trespassing city property signs that were rusting in place when I first came out here 4 years ago to look at it. And I bought the access license, an unusual arrangement that took me 3 months of correspondence with the Water Authority to work out, ultimately involving a modest annual fee and an agreement that I'd perform basic maintenance on the remaining infrastructure without knowing any of this. I chose this site because it was structurally ideal. Underground, concrete construction, municipal water infrastructure beneath it, accessible via an existing hatch system, remote enough from residential areas to avoid casual discovery. It was perfect. I need to know whether it was perfect by coincidence or by design. There's one person in my professional life who might have been in a position to point me toward this site: Theodore Brask. He was the principal engineer at the firm where I started my career, my first real mentor, the person who taught me how to read a site the way you read a person, looking for what it's hiding rather than just what it shows. He retired in 2019. I assumed it was age and health. He was in his mid-60s and had been talking about retirement for years. He was the one who first suggested, maybe 6 or 7 years ago now, that I should be thinking about redundancy plans. He said it casually, in the context of a professional conversation about disaster preparedness for infrastructure projects. But he said it in a way that I thought later was slightly pointed, like he was suggesting something specific to me. He's the one who suggested, during one of the last conversations we had before he retired, that I look into abandoned municipal water infrastructure as a category of site for personal preparedness. He had a reason for it. He said the structural integrity of reinforced concrete from the 1940s often exceeded modern construction in load-bearing terms, and that water infrastructure was by definition built with self-containment in mind. It all made sense. It was good advice. But Theodore is retired and mostly offline, and I haven't spoken to him in 2 years, and there's a sealed hatch in my floor, and a mystery I'm sitting above, and I have no way to reach him, and I'm 8 meters underground while the city burns. Day 11. The angle grinder is in the tool storage, which is a small alcove I cut into the east wall during the build-out. I have a 9-inch Makita with a cutting disc that I'd stored primarily for emergency structural work, cutting rebar in a collapse scenario, opening an alternative egress if needed. Today I used it to cut the hasp off the hatch. The noise was significant. The grinder is loud in any environment. In a concrete dome 8 meters underground, it turned into something that would have made your eardrums feel personally attacked. I wore my ear defenders and kept the cuts as short as possible. 2 cuts, each about 4 seconds, to remove the hasp entirely without damaging the hatch itself. After the noise stopped, I stood still for almost 5 minutes with the grinder in my hand, listening. The sounds from outside, what I can receive through the ventilation shafts, were unchanged. No increase in activity above me. Either the noise wasn't perceptible at the surface, or the baffles did their job, or anything that might have heard it didn't respond in a way I could detect. The hatch itself gave me trouble. The hinges were seized, and the iron was warped slightly. Decades of temperature cycling in the concrete, and I had to work a flat bar under the edge and lever it incrementally, about 1 centimeter at a time, before it lifted. When it finally came open, the air that came up was different, cooler by several degrees. A smell I can only describe as old and chemical, the way a laboratory supply closet smells, but flatter, like whatever was volatile in it had already dissipated over years of containment. Below the hatch, a vertical access shaft, maybe 1.5 meters in diameter, with iron rungs set into the concrete. About 6 meters of depth, then a floor. I could see the bottom with my flashlight. Bare concrete, dry, and in the center of the floor space, several large drums, painted gray-green, with labels I couldn't read from above. I went down. The lower chamber is smaller than the main reservoir, maybe 12 by 15 feet, rectangular, lower ceiling. 6 drums, approximately 220 liters each, the kind that are used for industrial chemical storage. The labels are printed on adhesive panels, and some of them have partially delaminated from the drum surface, but most of the text is still readable. The labeling is mostly alphanumeric codes, not words. A letter prefix followed by a 6-digit number, followed by a suffix, indicating lot and batch. But there's a secondary label on each drum, smaller, in a different font, that includes a 5-letter identifier, and, on 5 of the 6 drums, the same word, stabilizer. The 6th drum has a different secondary label. It doesn't say stabilizer. It says initiator. And underneath that, in smaller text that I had to get close to read, Vertex Bio Research Group, internal use only, batch VBR-1107, do not dispose without authorization from project lead. I sat on the floor of that lower chamber for about 20 minutes. Then I went back up, pulled the hatch shut behind me, and started writing. Initiator, stabilizer, 5 drums of one and 1 drum of the other. I don't have a biochemistry background, but I have been in enough industrial infrastructure to know roughly what those words mean in a compound context. An initiator is a primary agent, the thing that starts a process. A stabilizer is a support agent, the thing that controls or prolongs it, keeps it from degrading too quickly, allows it to remain viable. And those drums were sealed 8 meters below where I'm currently sitting, inside a reservoir that was leased for 5 years by a company called Vertex Bio Research Group, before being quietly handed back to the city and decommissioned. The stuff in those drums has been here for at least 12 years. Day 12, afternoon. There's been signal activity outside camera 4 again. I caught it this time. I've been checking the camera feeds every 2 hours instead of every 4, and at 11:22 a.m. I saw it. 3 flashes. A pause. 3 flashes. The light source is small, probably an LED flashlight, and it's coming from the area near the standpipe cluster, the same area that was blacked out on camera 4's feed 4 nights ago. 3 flashes. Pause. 3 flashes. That's not random, that's a pattern. And the pattern is aimed at camera 4 specifically, which means whoever is doing it knows camera 4 is there, which the notebook confirmed, and they know I'm watching the feed, which is an assumption on their part, but a reasonable one. They're trying to communicate. I have a flashlight of my own that I can position near the ventilation shaft baffles. In theory, if I open the lower baffle cap on the north shaft and position a light source below it, a directed beam might reflect upward through the baffled section and be partially visible at the standpipe opening. It's indirect. The flash pattern would be degraded, but it might be enough. 3 flashes back. A response. I haven't decided whether to do it. Responding confirms my presence, which they already know. It also opens a channel, which changes things in a direction I haven't fully worked out yet. My one rule, the rule I made 4 years ago, and the one I've been rehearsing ever since, is, once the door closes, no one else gets in. I said that to myself in what felt like a clear, practical voice. I said it because every shelter eventually fails when it becomes about more than one person. Resources, trust, decision-making, conflict. The more people you add, the more variables you add, and variables kill you. I've read enough disaster sociology to know that the most common failure mode of survival situations isn't resource depletion or zombie hordes. It's the social dynamics of groups under stress. One person is a closed system. One person can control every variable. That's what I told myself. But I also told myself I'd chosen this site independently and for rational engineering reasons, and that's looking significantly less true right now. If someone manipulated me into this location, if Theodore pointed me here for reasons that weren't about my well-being, then what else do I think I know that might not be true? I'm not sending the signal yet. I'm thinking. I do my best thinking and writing, which is why this notebook has gotten so full so quickly. I'll write my way to a decision. Day 13. I've been rereading the notebook from behind the barrel. The person writing it uses he to refer to me, which is straightforward, and I, without any name or identifying information. No name anywhere in the 60 pages. The handwriting, as I mentioned, reads as female to me. There's something in the pressure and the character formation that suggests a smaller hand, though I'm aware that's not a precise diagnostic. The field notes are detailed in a way that requires patience and focus. The knowledge base demonstrated across the entries is specific to biochemistry, water systems, and what reads like regulatory and compliance documentation, the way someone writes who has spent time generating or reviewing formal records. Lab technician, environmental compliance specialist, someone with technical background adjacent to the kind of work Vertex Bioresearch would do. The October 9th entry said, his profile, his building access history, his property records, his pattern of contact with former colleagues, suggests he would not respond well. She, I'm going to use she, provisionally, did a background workup on me. She knows enough about me to predict my response to being approached directly. That requires either significant time investment or access to data sources that aren't publicly available. Either she's been studying me for a very long time, or she has access to databases that aren't civilian grade. The October 13th entry mentioned cleanup vehicles on Route 9, white vans, hazmat rated, not there to help people. Route 9 is about 4 miles east. It's one of the main arterials out of the county, runs past a couple industrial zones. If hazmat-rated vehicles are running Route 9 in the middle of a zombie outbreak, they're not general disaster response. Hazmat vehicles don't respond to biological outbreak situations the way ambulances do. They respond to chemical and radiological events. They secure and remove materials. Like 6 drums in a subterranean chamber. Someone is coming here. Not the infected. Not random survivors. Someone who knows what's under this floor and wants it back. If those drums are what I think they might be, and I don't want to finish that sentence yet, because finishing it means accepting a logic I'm not ready for, then the person outside my shelter isn't a random follower. She's someone who knows what this site is, who's been trying to access the lower chamber, who, when she couldn't, decided to wait for the person inside to find it instead. She needs me to do something with what I find. 3 flashes. I turned on the flashlight tonight and aimed it up the north shaft and flashed back. 3 flashes. Pause. 1 flash. 3 flashes. I don't know what that second pattern means, but I stayed at the shaft opening for another 20 minutes and waited. Nothing more came. Tomorrow, I'll try again. Day 14. 7 a.m. I slept, surprisingly. 6 hours, which is more than I've managed since day 4. I don't know if it's the physical exhaustion catching up, or the strange relief of having made a decision, even a small one. Sending 3 flashes back was a decision. It committed me to something, even though I'm not yet sure what. I dreamed about Dennis. He was in the parking garage, standing by the stairwell, and he was fine. In the dream, he was just Dennis, wearing his hospital badge, and I was trying to explain something to him about the reservoir access license, why I'd chosen this site, the structural reasoning, and he kept nodding politely, the way he used to when I'd go on too long about engineering topics. And in the dream, I knew that he was dead, but he didn't, and I was trying to figure out whether I should tell him. I woke up and lay there for a while and didn't think about it. Food today, a breakfast of oats, water, and a half portion of dried fruit. The daily calorie target I've set for myself is 1,800, below maintenance, but not starving, appropriate for limited physical activity. I'm being careful with the protein bars especially, since those are what's been taken, and my remaining stock has to stretch. I've broken the bars into thirds for my daily protein supplement, which is a small humiliation that I'm noting here mostly because it amuses me mildly. I fixed the camera 4 mounting bracket this morning. It had been loosened. I confirmed this when I went to check the unit directly. The mounting screws were backed out approximately 2 turns from their correct torque, consistent with the bracket being moved and then replaced. Whoever covered the lens had removed the mounting screws first, to allow the camera to swing on its pivot, then replace them afterward. Thoughtful. They didn't want me to know the camera had been physically touched, only blacked out. But I did know, because I torqued those screws to a specific value, and I remember things like that. I remember things in millimeters and degrees. Occupational trait. I retorqued the screws and noted the event in this log. Day 14, 8 p.m. 7 flashes from camera 4 direction at 7:40 p.m. Consistent spacing, not the same pattern as before. I counted them twice. 7. I responded with 7 flashes down the north shaft at 7:50 p.m. At 8 p.m., from the camera, a new pattern. 2 flashes, pause. 3 flashes, pause. 2 flashes. 2 3 2. Then a long pause. Then 1 1. Short pause, 1 1 again. I wrote all of this down as it happened. 2 3 2. Then 1 1 twice. I don't know Morse code, not properly. I know SOS. I know it's 3 short, 3 long, 3 short. This isn't SOS. But 1 1 repeated could be a request. Come in. Acknowledge. Hello. Something simple and bilateral. Requesting a simple bilateral response. I sent back 1 1. Pause. 1 1. Then nothing for 20 minutes. Then, at 8:22 p.m., from the camera 4 direction, a single long steady beam. Not flashes. A sustained light, maybe 6 seconds, then off. Sustained light, not a pattern, a statement. I'm still thinking about what that means. Day 15. I found something in the main reservoir today that I should have found earlier, and the fact that I didn't is bothering me more than the find itself. I was doing a routine check of the ventilation baffle on the south shaft. The north shaft is the one I've been using to signal, and I'd been so focused on it that I hadn't properly inspected the south shaft for several days. When I removed the baffle cap to inspect the filter medium, I found wedged in the inner baffle housing, about 40 centimeters down the shaft, a small waterproof container, flat, rectangular, about the size of a deck of cards, black plastic, with a rubber gasket seal around the lid. Inside, a USB drive and a folded piece of paper. The paper is brief. 6 lines, handwritten. Same handwriting as the notebook. It says, "My name is Faye. The drive contains the documents you need to understand what's under you. I've been trying to get them to you for weeks. I couldn't go inside. I got here too late, and then you sealed the hatch, and I've been working with what I have. The cleanup team I mentioned knows about this site. They have an extraction timeline. You have maybe 8 to 10 days from when they reach the county line, which based on what I've seen was around October 12th. I can't force you to open the door, but I need you to at least look at what's on the drive, then decide. The drums in the lower chamber are the reason all of this happened. F. Faye." She's had multiple access points to this shelter that I've only discovered gradually. The hatch, the hidden notebook, the south shaft container. She's been methodical and patient, and she's kept these things separate, so that even if I found one, I'd have to work to find the others. Like she was assuming I might stop looking after the first discovery, and she was making sure I couldn't. I have the USB drive in my hand right now. I have a laptop, an older Lenovo I brought as my primary computing device. Charged, no wireless capability. I disabled the Wi-Fi card before bringing it down. The drive will work in it. Reading the files is not a risk in the conventional sense. What is a risk is what I do with the information afterward. Let me read the drive. Day 15. Later. 4 hours. I've been at the laptop for 4 hours. There are 847 files on the drive. Documents, images, spreadsheets, and several video files. The organization is careful. Whoever compiled this archive spent significant time structuring it for someone who needed to understand it quickly. There's a top-level folder called Read First, containing a single document, 17 pages long, that serves as an annotated summary. I'm going to write down the key points here, in my own words, the way I understand them, because that's how I process things. Vertex Bio Research Group is a private defense and biotechnology contractor. It's registered in Delaware, operates primarily through subsidiaries, and has held several government contracts with agencies I recognize. Some health, some defense, some described vaguely as advisory. The company's core work, based on the documents here, is what the summary document calls transmission dynamics research, which is the study of how pathogens spread through populations, specifically, how quickly and through what pathways. Between 2009 and 2014, Vertex conducted a project at this site, the reservoir, under a lease with the City Water Authority. The project involved testing the behavior of certain biological compounds in water table and soil environments. The compounds were stored in the lower chamber, 6 drums, which I have now identified with my own eyes. Based on the documents, the contents of those drums are drums 1 through 5, a synthetic stabilizing compound, laboratory designation VBRS, designed to maintain the viability of a primary biological agent in various environmental conditions, including soil, water, and ambient air exposure. Drum 6, the primary biological agent itself, laboratory designation VBR1107, project name within Vertex's internal documentation, Initiator. VBR1107 was developed as a research compound studying rapid neurological degradation in infected tissue. The summary document is careful to note that VBR1107 was never approved for any use outside controlled laboratory conditions. It was never supposed to leave the laboratory. It is, based on the documents, the pathogen responsible for what the news was calling the outbreak in Hargrove County. The documents trace a chain of custody breakdown. VBR1107 was supposed to be destroyed after the Vertex research lease concluded in 2014. The order for destruction was issued. A destruction certificate was filed. But the destruction didn't happen. The drums were capped, the lower chamber was resealed, and the site was handed back to the city with the materials still inside. The destruction certificate was falsified. Why? The summary doesn't conclude definitively, but there are internal Vertex emails in the archive, recovered, the summary says, through a combination of a formal records request, a whistleblower disclosure, and what is described with some obliqueness as unauthorized access, suggesting she got into their systems somehow. The emails suggest that some faction within Vertex believed VBR1107 had commercial or strategic value that made destruction premature. There are references to downstream applications and accelerated review, and a phrase that appears in 3 separate emails from a senior director. The materials remain available for future use. The outbreak in Hargrove County. The documents don't prove direct causal connection from the drums in this chamber to the outbreak in Hargrove. What they show is that VBR1107 is consistent with the pathological presentation of the outbreak, the neurological vector, the specific behavioral signature of the infected, the rate of transmission. The documents also show that several Vertex employees made unexplained site visits to this location in early September of this year, 6 weeks before the first outbreak reports. Early September. The hatch ceiling around 3 sides. Someone tried to open the lower chamber from above. Not Faye, this was before she arrived. This was Vertex. Did they open it? Did something get out? The remaining documents include site access logs, vehicle records, personnel movement reports that Faye appears to have either obtained legally or taken without authorization. The access logs show 2 Vertex-contracted vehicles at the perimeter of this site on September 3rd and September 8th. Both visits lasted less than 2 hours. What they did during those visits isn't recorded in the logs. The last document in the Read First folder is titled, "What I Need From You." It's a single paragraph. The documents on this drive constitute evidence of criminal activity. At minimum, environmental crimes, falsification of federal destruction records, and potentially criminal negligence causing the mass casualty event currently occurring across the region. This evidence needs to reach external parties, journalists, legal entities, federal agencies with jurisdiction over Vertex's conduct, before the cleanup team destroys this site and removes the materials. I need a transmitter. You have a radio, I think. I've heard cycling transmissions from inside during my time at the site. If it has broadcast capability, I can compose a transmission with the compressed document archive. We can do this from inside. You don't have to let me in. I just need access to a transmit-capable device for approximately 6 hours. There's a way to pass equipment through the north ventilation shaft that I've been working on, if you're willing. She wants to use my radio to broadcast the documents. My radio. That's why she hasn't tried to break in, hasn't tried to force anything. She doesn't need inside. She needs the transmitter. I'm sitting here, and the realization that I've just had is almost funny in how specific it is, how much more specific it is than the question I thought I was dealing with. I didn't think the decision was going to be, let someone borrow my radio. I thought it was going to be, let someone in. And those are very different decisions. But I haven't made either one yet. Day 16. I spent most of yesterday thinking about Theodore Brask. I looked through the Vertex personnel records in the document archive on the USB drive. It took a while. There are hundreds of names, and the search function on the file viewer I'm using is basic, but I found it eventually. Theodore Brask, listed as a technical consultant on Vertex Bioresearch Group projects from 2007 to 2015. His specific project assignment from 2009 to 2014 is listed as the reservoir site. His role, structural and civil infrastructure assessment. Theodore assessed this reservoir for Vertex. He would have known every detail of this site's construction, the lower chamber, the storage configuration, the access points. He knew it better than I did when I found it. And then, 6 years later, he suggested I look into abandoned municipal water infrastructure for a personal shelter project. He didn't tell me about the lower chamber. He didn't tell me about Vertex. He didn't tell me about the drums. I don't know what to make of Theodore Brask right now. He is? I don't know if he's alive. A good man, as far as I knew him. Mentored me honestly. Never gave me bad advice that I could identify as such at the time. But honest in most things, and hiding nothing, aren't the same category. People can be genuinely good in daily life and compartmentalize something massive without those two things touching each other. Or he could have pointed me to this shelter knowing exactly what was in it, with intentions I can't determine from here. The document archive doesn't include anything with Theodore's name after 2015. Whatever he did or knew after that point, Faye doesn't have a record of it, or didn't include it. I need to ask her. And asking her means communicating more directly than 3 flash patterns and a USB drive through a ventilation shaft. Day 16. Evening. I spent 2 hours with the north ventilation shaft today, working out the geometry. The shaft is 60 millimeters in diameter, about 2.5 inches, small. The inner baffle is 40 centimeters from the surface opening, which means anything entering from the top would have to pass through 60 millimeters of clearance for about 40 centimeters before reaching the baffle. And then the baffle itself is a series of angled panels that can be partially disassembled from below. I can't pass the radio up through the shaft. The housing is too large, but there are components of the radio's transmit circuit that I could potentially separate out. I have some electronics knowledge, not a radio technician, but I've done enough equipment-level installation and repair to understand basic circuit architecture. The transmit module in the radio I have, a modified commercial shortwave, capable of AM and SSB broadcast, is a distinct unit from the display and control assembly, connected by a ribbon cable. In theory, if I removed the transmit module, fabricated a simple interface, a push button and a wire to a microphone element, I could pass the transmit module up the shaft on an extension lead. That's a few hours of work. It would compromise my radio. I'd be separating components that weren't designed to be separated, and I might not be able to reassemble them correctly. That means I lose the radio as a receive tool as well, which is a significant cost. The radio has been my primary method of monitoring external emergency broadcasts, and while those broadcasts have become increasingly sporadic and unreliable over the past week, they're still a channel. Losing it is real. On the other hand, if the cleanup team has an 8 to 10 day window from county line entry, and they entered around October 12th, I'm already 4 days into that window. I have maybe 4 to 6 days before they reach this site. What happens when they reach this site? The documents suggest their goal is to recover or destroy the drums in the lower chamber. They know the drums are here. The site access logs confirm they've been here before. They'll know how to access the lower chamber, because Vertex designed it. What do they do about the shelter inhabitant, 8 meters above the chamber? Faye said, they're not there to help people. Day 17. Morning. I didn't sleep much. Got maybe 3 hours in 2 separate windows. The rest of the time I was lying on the cot doing arithmetic on the transmitter modification in my head, and also doing a different kind of arithmetic that's harder to put into equations. Here's where I land after 17 days down here, for what it's worth. In the kind of clear-eyed accounting that exhaustion sometimes produces if you let it. I built this shelter for one person. I built it over 4 years, in secret, with meticulous planning, for the specific purpose of surviving a societal collapse event, with the minimal variables that come from operating alone. The one rule, no one else gets in, was the logical corollary of that design philosophy. More people means more variables. More variables means more failure modes. That logic is still correct. But I built this shelter on a foundation that was chosen for me. Someone, possibly Theodore, possibly the whole enterprise of how Vertex selected and seeded this site, possibly some intermediate sequence of events I still don't fully understand. Someone pointed me here. My careful, rational, independent decision-making was downstream of something I didn't know was in the water, so to speak. So when I think about my one rule, I also have to think about which decisions here are actually mine. The rule is mine. The rule stays. Nobody is coming inside. But the transmitter is a separate question. Day 17, 2 p.m. I started on the transmitter modification. 3 hours of work to get the transmit module separated cleanly. The ribbon cable was the fiddliest part. The connector housing is small, and the locking tab on this model is a design choice by someone who has never tried to release it with slightly clumsy hands in low light. But I got it apart without damaging the ribbon. The transmit module itself is approximately the size of a paperback book, and I've fabricated an interface, a push-to-talk button wired to the module's trigger circuit, and a small condenser mic element taken from the backup two-way radio I keep in the emergency kit. The whole assembly sits on a length of 18-gauge speaker cable that I'm using as both the power lead and the signal lead. It's not elegant. If Theodore could see it, he'd tell me about the appropriate gauge for a signal lead in approximately 4 sentences, but it'll work for the purpose. The assembly fits through the 60mm shaft. I've tested it. Fit a section of PVC pipe of the same diameter, and confirmed the module will pass through without snagging. The speaker cable will run down through the shaft to my power bank and to the signal input on the main transmit circuit, which I've left connected to the antenna lead. Faye sends from above. I route the signal from below. If she has the broadcast file for the documents, she can push it through my antenna. Tomorrow morning I'll position the module and signal her. Day 17, night. Something different from the cameras tonight. Camera 2, northwest approach, facing the drainage berm, picked up movement at 9:47 p.m. Not human movement, not animal movement, the kind of movement that I've started to recognize over these 17 days as belonging to the infected. One figure coming down the slope of the berm, moving in the irregular, stimulus-seeking pattern they move in when they're not locked onto a target. Slow, drifting, changing direction without apparent reason, the way water moves in low terrain. It came to within about 15 meters of the camera position, and then veered north without approaching further. That's not unusual in itself. The infected are a constant low-level background presence. I've seen them on camera intermittently throughout the past 2 weeks. What was unusual tonight was that, about 40 minutes after that single figure drifted through Camera 2's area, Camera 1, the main hatch area camera, showed 2 figures moving along the fence line on the east side of the site, pausing at the main access gate, and then continuing past it, moving, not lingering, like they were attracted to something in this general direction, and then lost the stimulus before reaching it. I'm trying to figure out what stimulus would draw infected from 2 different compass points toward this site at roughly the same time. The most obvious answer is sound. Something made a noise here, in the past hour or 2, that was perceptible at a distance. My transmitter modification work today wasn't silent. The soldering iron, the cutting of the speaker cable, the testing of the circuit with a brief pulse that probably transmitted a burst of white noise for about a second of white noise at broadcast frequency, on an antenna that emerges from the surface at the standpipe cluster. If the infected respond to sound, and if electromagnetic transmissions at certain frequencies produce audible artifacts, through the kinds of receivers that emergency broadcast equipment carries. And some do. Some AM frequencies produce a 60-cycle hum through unshielded electronics at close range. I was careless. Not with audio, but with electromagnetic emission. If any of the infected were carrying functional electronic devices that would respond to an AM broadcast pulse, this is getting into territory where I could talk myself into almost any conclusion. Let me be practical. The infected moved near the site. They didn't stay. There's no evidence of sustained interest. I'll monitor cameras overnight and see if the pattern changes. Also, Faye is still out there. She was outside last night. The standpipe area showed her flash signal at around 11 p.m. She's moving around the site. If the infected are being drawn toward here, she's in more danger than I am. That's a fact. I wrote it down. I'm not going to tell myself it doesn't matter. Day 18. Faye was at the standpipe at 7 a.m., which I know, because the camera 4 feed showed a brief flash sequence. 232, the same one she used earlier. Acknowledgement. She's still functioning, still at the site, still watching. I positioned the transmitter module at the base of the north shaft this morning, with the speaker cable running up through the shaft as far as it would reach, about 3 meters, leaving the module body sitting at the shaft mouth from inside. I ran the cable connection back down and out of the shaft, along the reservoir wall, to the power bank and the signal circuit. Then I went to the shaft mouth, removed the lower baffle panel, and pushed the transmitter module up into the shaft body until it stopped against the inner baffles. I can't push it all the way to the surface. The baffles are in the way, but the module is now sitting in the shaft, and the cable is running from it back to me. Through the shaft, speaking upward, I said, "Can you hear this?" I felt stupid. I felt stupid saying that into a ventilation shaft, but that's where we are. Nothing for about 30 seconds. Then, faintly, distorted by the baffles, yes. One word, clear enough. A voice that I now know belongs to someone named Faye. I said, "The transmitter module is at the baffle level. I can't push it higher without dismantling the baffle. If you can reach the top of the shaft opening and pull the cable, the module will come up to you." A pause, longer this time. Then, give me a minute. I waited. There was a scraping sound, and then the cable went taut, and then the module was gone from my end. She'd pulled it through the shaft from above. 3 minutes later, the cable went slack, and her voice came down again, cleaner this time. "I have it. Is this, you said the cable connects back down to your signal circuit?" I said yes. I told her the power was active, the button was push to talk. The mic element would pick up within about 30 centimeters. Another pause. Then, "I have a 64 kilobyte compressed archive. How long should a transmission take?" I told her at the bandwidth this radio achieves, at the frequency I'd preset. Roughly 4 hours of clean broadcast, maybe 5.5 with the overhead. She said okay. Then she said, "I should tell you some things while this is running." I said, "Tell me about Theodore Brask." The silence on the other end of the shaft was the kind that has weight to it. Then she said, "He was my father." Day 18. Late afternoon. I'm going to write down what she told me as accurately as I can, because her voice through the baffles was intermittent and some of it required me to ask her to repeat things. Theodore Brask retired from the firm in 2019. That part I knew. What I didn't know was why, specifically why when he did, rather than later, when age and health would have made it genuinely expected. Faye says he retired because of what he'd found out about the drums. He'd consulted for Vertex on the reservoir project, supervised the structural installation of the lower chamber storage system, signed off on the infrastructure. When the project concluded, he'd been given documentation indicating the materials were destroyed. He believed it. He signed the structural decommissioning sign-off. In 2018, 4 years after the Vertex lease ended, Theodore was working on an unrelated project nearby, routine inspection of a municipal stormwater easement, and he accessed this site by accident, following a drainage line that crossed the property. He found the hatch in the lower chamber accessible, not broken into, still sealed as Vertex had left it. But when he checked the destruction records in his project files, cross-referenced them against the drums he could see through the hatch, The numbers didn't match the batches documented as destroyed. He started asking questions internally. He went to Vertex contacts he'd maintained. He got nowhere. He then did something that, based on what Faye describes, was out of character for Theodore, as I knew him. He started making copies. Records. The kind of documentation that would later fill a 847-file USB drive. He retired from the firm in early 2019. He spent the next 4 years building the archive and trying to figure out what to do with it. He died in February of this year. Heart failure, the death certificate says. He was 68, not an unreasonable age for cardiac events. But Faye, who is 31, who is a bioenvironmental scientist at a private lab, who has her father's methodical nature and, apparently, considerably more willingness to do things her father considered outside the rules, Faye has spent the 8 months since his death convinced it wasn't natural. She can't prove it. She told me that directly, without being asked. I can't prove it, she said. But he was healthy. He'd been healthy. He had a stress test done in November, and then, in February. She said that last part and didn't finish the sentence. It didn't need finishing. She found his archive after he died. He'd left instructions, not quite a will, more like a letter in an envelope in a specific location that he'd told her about years before, during a conversation she hadn't fully understood at the time. The letter said where to find the archive and what he'd wanted to do with it, and why he hadn't been able to. It also told her about this site, specifically that he'd pointed me toward it, and why. Theodore had known about me for years before we met. His consulting work for the Water Authority had involved reviewing access license applications, and my application crossed his desk. He recognized my name from the civil engineering community, saw my background, and then spent some time learning about me. He saw someone methodical, detail-oriented, technically capable, and, his words in the letter apparently, someone who would look beneath the surface of a thing if given enough reason. He pointed me to this site deliberately. He wanted me to find the lower chamber. Not immediately. He knew I'd seal the shelter and not look too carefully at the floor right away. But eventually, he believed that the right person in the right location, with the right documentation, could do something that he, as an aging man with no technical broadcast resources and no credibility as a whistleblower, couldn't. He wanted me to transmit the archive. He apparently told Faye as much in the letter. She's been following his plan. She compiled the archive from his files, added material she'd independently obtained, and came to this site 6 months after his death, in August, when she calculated I was close to sealing in. She'd been watching me from the drainage berm, at the position that the notebook confirmed. She'd gone inside the shelter twice, testing whether she could access the lower chamber, and using the opportunity to leave the notebook and the USB drive. She got to the south shaft container before I sealed the hatch. She got to the north shaft and camera 4's blind spot afterward. She's been living rough near the site for months. Before the outbreak, that was an inconvenience. Since the outbreak, it's been something else entirely. How are you managing out there? I asked her, through a ventilation shaft, to someone I've never seen. Well enough, she said. I have a cache, food, water filter, first aid. I prepared. You learned that from your father, I said. I learned it from my father, she said. Day 19, morning. The transmission is running. She told me the broadcast started at around 10 p.m. last night, and, based on the archive size and the frequency, should complete around 4 a.m. this morning. I can't monitor it directly from below. I've lost the receive capability on my radio, which I accepted as the cost of this arrangement. But at 4:30 a.m., I heard through the shaft that the push-to-talk button had been released, which means either the transmission completed or she stopped it. At 5 a.m., she confirmed, complete. The archive was broadcast on 3 frequencies consecutively. My primary preset, a backup frequency that Vertex's own internal communications apparently use, and a civilian emergency frequency that's still being monitored by several independent stations operating outside the affected zone. The compressed file is small enough that any station receiving it will get the whole archive, not fragments. Whether anyone receives it and does anything with it is a different question. She passed the transmitter module back down the shaft this morning. I'll try to reassemble the radio later. though I'm not confident about the ribbon cable. While the transmission was running last night, I was doing something else. I went back down into the lower chamber. I spent about an hour down there with the laptop, going through the document archive a second time, specifically looking for anything I hadn't absorbed in my first read. The first time through, I was looking for the big narrative. This time I was looking at the details. The batch numbers on the drums against the batch documentation in the vertex records. The installation specifications for the lower chamber. The structural drawings. The structural drawings. They're in the archive. Theodore's copies of the vertex installation documents for this site. And when I looked at them carefully, the way I look at structural drawings, with the habit of checking every dimension and every note field, there's a third level. Below the lower chamber, there's another space. It's not labeled as a storage chamber or a functional room. It's labeled in the drawings as a drainage sump, a collection point for groundwater intrusion, essentially a concrete cistern below the existing installation. Standard infrastructure practice for below-grade construction in areas with high water tables. But the dimensions are wrong for a sump. A sump is typically a small, shallow catchment, 2 meters by 2 meters at most, a meter of depth. The space shown in these drawings is 4 meters by 6 meters and 3 meters deep. That's not a sump, that's a room. It has its own ventilation notation. It has what appears to be a utility connection, a conduit running from the room to the surface via a separate path that doesn't intersect with any infrastructure I've identified or installed. I don't have access to that level from inside the lower chamber. I looked at every surface down there, and the floor is solid, the walls are solid, and there's no obvious hatch or access point. But the drawings show one. In the northwest corner of the lower chamber, labeled Emergency Access Panel, set flush. Flush, painted over maybe, or covered in the same gray-green paint as the rest of the chamber walls. I tapped on the northwest wall, in the section that corresponded to where the panel should be, 4 feet off the floor, about 2 feet wide. The sound was different. The concrete on either side of the panel position has the flat, dead response of solid poured concrete against a wall of earth. The section between those positions has a slightly hollow quality, more resonance, marginally brighter tone. There's something behind there. Day 19, afternoon. I went back down with a cold chisel and a rubber mallet. I worked the joints in the wall panel area slowly, following the geometry from the drawing. The panel had been painted over, the same gray-green, and the joint was sealed with the same industrial epoxy I'd found around the floor hatch above. But the application was thinner here, and the epoxy had dried more brittle due to the lower temperature in the chamber. It took about 40 minutes. The access panel is approximately 60 centimeters wide and 80 centimeters tall, a tight fit for an adult, but manageable. Behind it, a short crawl space, maybe 1.5 meters long, then a vertical shaft, iron rungs again. I could see the lower floor from the shaft top with my flashlight. I'm going to tell you what was down there. But first, I want to say that in 17 years of structural engineering, I have never gone into a space I've discovered and not understood what it was for. Structural spaces have purposes. You read the geometry and the materials and the connections, and the purpose is legible. Every space tells you what it's doing. The space below the lower chamber did not tell me anything I was prepared to read. It was 3 meters by 6, roughly. The floor was finished concrete, not bare aggregate. The walls were smooth. The ceiling was low, about 2 meters, and on the wall facing the entry crawl space, mounted directly to the concrete, was a set of shelving units. Metal, industrial, the kind you find in a warehouse. And on the shelving units were boxes, sealed cardboard boxes, each one about the size of a large suitcase, each one labeled with a date and a 2-letter prefix. The dates ranged from 2010 to 2013. There were 41 boxes. I opened 2 of them. Each one contained the same category of contents, sealed vials of biological material, labeled in the same alphanumeric code system as the drums above, alongside thick bound reports, Vertex internal documentation, formatted as project reports, with cover pages bearing the project name, initiator, and, in each box, a printed photograph. The photographs were not of equipment or infrastructure. They were photographs of people, groups of people, photographed in what appeared to be residential neighborhoods, in parks, on streets, ordinary people. The photographs had dates on them, stamped in the corner, in the way automatic cameras timestamp images. The dates on the photographs in Box 1 corresponded to the dates of the first reported outbreak cluster in a neighborhood called Ridgeline in Hargrove County. Ridgeline, which I looked up when the early news reports came out because I wanted to understand the geography, is a low-income neighborhood. High density, older housing stock, mixed residential and light commercial. I stood there in that basement room for a long time. I wasn't only the person being used as an unwitting transmitter for a whistleblower archive. I was standing inside a facility that was used to plan and document what the photographs implied. This wasn't a containment failure. There was no accident. VBR 1107 was released deliberately, and the 41 boxes in that room are the documentation of how it was planned and executed. I told her through the ventilation shaft at 8 a.m. while she ate something. I could hear her chewing, which was a very strange thing to find comforting, and I did find it comforting. And I tried to describe what I'd found without editorializing, the way I'd describe a structural discovery on a site. Just facts, dimensions, contents. She was quiet for a long time when I finished. Then she said, "He knew about the third level. He never told me." I said, "Was he protecting you?" She said, "Probably." Then, or maybe he thought I'd do something about it before he could control what happened. He was careful about sequences, order of operations. He liked to do things in the right order. I said, the right order here would have been archive transmitted, evidence in the right hands, then someone retrieves the physical documentation. She said yes. Then she said, "That's not going to happen now, is it?" I understood what she meant. The cleanup team. The people in the white hazmat vans on Route 9. If Vertex sent people here, their own people, with an agenda to recover and remove, those boxes in the lower room, the boxes with the photographs and the dated reports, are exactly what they're coming for. Everything else, the drums, the shelter, the transmitter, me, secondary. If they get those boxes before anyone gets to this site for any other reason, the physical evidence is gone. And the transmission we sent 2 nights ago, does it reach anyone? Is anyone out there with the bandwidth and the resources to act on a broadcast file received in the middle of a catastrophic outbreak? I don't know. I genuinely don't know. But the one thing I know is that the 41 boxes are currently in a room below a shelter I sealed against exactly this kind of situation. And the only other person who knows about them is a woman who's been living rough outside that shelter for months and can't get in. My rule. I've been sitting with my rule for 3 days now, in a different way than I've been sitting with it for the past 4 years. The past 4 years I held it as a design choice. Now I'm holding it as something that's going to make a decision for me that I'm not sure is the right one. Day 20, evening. Cameras showed something at 4:30 p.m. that changed my math significantly. Camera 3, east side, facing back toward the access road. 2 white vans, moving slowly. They turned off the access road and stopped about 200 meters from the fence line. From the camera distance, I couldn't read the markings, but the vehicles are consistent with the hazmat-rated commercial vans used by environmental remediation contractors. Not ambulances, not military, not emergency services. Contractor vehicles. 4 people got out of the vans, wearing what looked like Level B hazmat suits. Not full Level A, but respiratory protection, chemical-resistant outerwear. They stood at the fence line for about 15 minutes and appeared to be taking readings. They had equipment, handheld devices they held toward the site. Then they got back in the vans. Not approaching yet, assessing. I called up the shaft immediately. Faye responded in about 2 minutes. She'd seen them too, from the berm position. She already knew the protocol, she said. They'd do a remote assessment first, then come back for extraction, probably within 24 to 48 hours. They'd want to know what they were dealing with before sending personnel inside. I said, "If they find you," she said, "they won't find me. I know this berm better than they do." She sounded more tired than confident. which I appreciated as more honest than the alternative. I said, "Faye, the boxes in the third level. If they get to those boxes," she said. "I know." We were both quiet for a moment. Then she said, "There's something I should have told you before." She told me about the secondary copy of the archive, not on the drive she'd left me, a different copy, compressed differently, on a smaller medium. She'd hidden it in the shelter during one of her 2 visits before I sealed in. She was going to tell me where it was after we established communication through the shaft. She told me where. It's behind the inner baffle housing on the south shaft, which is where I found the USB container, the waterproof case, not the container. Behind the container's cavity, there's a small magnetic holder she'd affixed to the concrete surface. On it, a micro SD card. The micro SD is for the physical archive backup, in case the broadcast didn't get through, in case the first USB drive was lost or destroyed. "But there's something on the card that isn't on the USB drive," she said. "A single document, a letter. Theodore's letter, the one he left for her. The one that explains not just what Vertex did, but who specifically ordered the release of VBR 1107. Names. The project director, the agency contacts who approved it, the date and time of the authorization." She held that back from the USB drive deliberately. She said, "The archive without the letter is evidence of a corporate crime. The letter with the names makes it personal liability. I wanted the archive out first, broadcast, somewhere, received, stored. And then, the letter is different." I said, "Why are you telling me this now?" She said, "Because I might need you to get it out if something happens to me." Day 21. I didn't sleep. The cameras were clear all night. No movement from the vans, no infected near the access road, nothing from the standpipe area until 5 a.m. when Phase 2 flash acknowledgement came through. She was all right through the night. I spent the night hours doing what I usually do when I can't sleep, which is working through problems on paper. I've filled about 60 pages of this log since sealing in, which is more than I've written by hand in probably the last 5 years combined. There's something about the absence of a keyboard that makes writing feel different. Slower, and because it's slower, more considered. Here is what I know. As of day 21, 1. Vertex Bioresearch Group released a biological agent, VBR 1107, into a residential population deliberately. The evidence for this is in the third-level room below me. 2. They falsified destruction records for the material stored at this site, leaving 6 drums containing the agent and its stabilizer compound under a decommissioned public reservoir. 3. Theodore Brask discovered this, compiled evidence over 4 years, and arranged, without my knowledge or consent, for me to be positioned at this site to transmit that evidence. 4. His daughter, Faye, has been at this site for months, completing what he started. 5. Vertex's cleanup team is within 24 to 48 hours of coming to this site. 6. The physical documentation in the third-level room, the 41 boxes, is more damning than the broadcast archive because it's material evidence. 7. The micro SD card contains the letter that names the individuals responsible. 8. Faye is outside and increasingly exposed. 9. My rule says she doesn't come in. 10. My rule was built on the assumption that I'd made an independent decision to be at this site, which was not entirely true. I haven't finished solving this problem, but I know where the load is bearing now. Day 21, afternoon. 2 things happened in quick succession today that forced my hand before I'd finished working it out in my head. At 1:14 p.m., Camera 2 showed 3 infected moving along the northwest drainage berm, not drifting this time, moving with the purposefulness that means they've locked onto a stimulus. They moved along the berm toward the standpipe area and stopped about 30 meters from the standpipe cluster. Then a sound, through the shaft above the baffle, something I couldn't interpret. Then Faye's voice, lower than before, tight. "There's 3 of them on the berm. They're not moving. They heard something." I said, "Stay still." She said, "I am." A pause. "There's also, Callum, there's a 4th one coming from the east, along the fence line." I was watching camera 1 at the same time. She was right. A single figure moving along the fence, heading west toward the standpipe area. I said, "How far are you from the hatch?" I said it before I'd decided what the answer meant. She said, 30 meters. I said, "Can you get there without sound?" Long pause. The sound of her breathing through the shaft baffle, very controlled. She said, "Maybe. 3 of the 4 are behind me and north, 1 to the east. If I go low along the south side of the berm, maybe." I said, "Faye." She said, "I know what you're about to say." I said, "I haven't decided yet." She said, "You called me by name." That's close enough. What happened next took about 8 minutes. I'm going to write it straight through, because I don't want to editorialize. I went to the hatch, my hatch, the main one, at the base of the access shaft, 8 meters below the surface. I disengaged the primary bolt, a 30mm steel bolt that I'd machined to tolerances that would stop it from vibrating open under concussion. And then the 2 secondary bolts, which are smaller and require a specific rotation sequence to disengage without a tool, because I built it that way. I left the hatch in the closed position but unbolted. I went back to the shaft foot and set up through the north shaft. It's unbolted. If you get to it, pull the handle twice and it'll open inward. She didn't respond verbally, which meant she was already moving. I stood at the base of the main shaft, 8 meters of vertical ladder between me and the surface, and I listened. I couldn't see anything. The shaft opening at the surface is covered by a camouflaged cap designed to look like a maintenance access point, and the access to the shaft itself from the surface requires knowing exactly where the cap release is, which Faye knew because she'd found it during her earlier site access. For about 5 minutes, nothing. Just the sounds that came through the ventilation shafts, which is to say, some ambient outdoor sounds I couldn't fully interpret, and my own heartbeat doing what it does. Then I heard the cap above, the specific sound of the spring release mechanism disengaging. Then footsteps on iron rungs, fast but controlled, someone who's used rungs before. 8 meters of descent in maybe 15 seconds. The hatch opened from inside the shaft, and Faye dropped into the reservoir. Here is what I can tell you about the first 60 seconds of having someone else in this space. The reservoir felt smaller, not uncomfortably, just different. The way a room with a second person in it changes its dimensions in some perception you can't fully locate. I'd been alone in here for 21 days, and in that time, my body had calibrated to every dimension of the space, at a level below conscious thought, the way you calibrate to your bedroom in the dark. The addition of another body, another moving, breathing, present body, reset that calibration. She was smaller than I'd imagined her. About 5'4", dark hair pulled back in a way that said she'd done it quickly and kept redoing it out of habit, not for aesthetics. There was a gash on her left forearm, not fresh, about a week old by the look of it, scabbed and held with butterfly closures from what must have been her first aid cache. She was wearing a dark canvas jacket and cargo pants with a lot of pockets, most of which appeared to have things in them. She looked around the reservoir once, quickly. Then she looked at me. She said, "You look like someone who's been underground for 3 weeks." I said, "You look like someone who's been living in a drainage ditch." She said, "Fair." Then she sat down on the floor, not in one of the camp chairs, just cross-legged on the rubber mat, and put her face in her hands for a moment, not crying, just being somewhere that was not outside. Day 22. Faye is in the shelter. That's the reality now. And I've written it down as a fact because I believe in writing facts down before you start interpreting them. There's a second camp chair now. I got it out of storage and set it up next to mine at the folding table. She's been using it for meals. I've increased the daily ration slightly, because she was clearly not meeting her calorie baseline on whatever she'd been running outside, and the situation requires her to be functional, which requires fuel. I've adjusted the inventory projections. At current rations, with 2 people, I have approximately 9 months of calories remaining. 9 months is still an eternity. The social math changed. The resource math is still fine. The social math. I spent 4 years deciding I was better alone, and I've spent the past 20 hours in a space with someone else. And I need to be honest about what that's actually like. It's not what I expected. I expected it to feel like a compromise. like accepting a variable I'd specifically engineered out. What it actually feels like is more complicated than that. She's not a variable. She's a person who thinks differently than I do about most things, who uses the pump twice when I'd have used it once, who hums to herself while she reads and doesn't notice she's doing it, who asked me this morning how I'd tested the artesian water, and then, when I explained my testing methodology, fully expecting her to nod politely and move on, said, "Did you check for VBRS metabolite? The stabilizer compound breaks down in aqueous environments into a secondary compound that your standard lab panel wouldn't flag." I said, "What does the secondary compound do?" She said, "In small concentrations, probably nothing. It's mildly neuroactive, but not at low exposure." She paused. "I'd want to know what concentrations you're pulling, though." I did not answer her right away, because I was thinking about the fact that I've been drinking this water for 21 days, and I didn't know to check for that. I said, "I'll test it." She said, "Yeah, sooner rather than later." Day 22, afternoon. We went into the lower chamber together. I showed her the drums. She already knew they were there. She'd been trying to access this space herself, which is what the partial epoxy seal breaking on 3 sides of the floor hatch was about. She'd been working at it with a pry bar, she said, from the floor hatch above, but couldn't get leverage without risking sound transmission into the shelter. She stopped when I sealed in. Seeing the drums in person, she touched the surface of drum 6, the initiator drum, with the back of her hand, and held it there for a second, then pulled it back. She said nothing. Then I showed her the access panel to the 3rd level. I watched her face when we went down into the 3rd room, and she saw the shelving and the boxes. She didn't comment immediately. She went to the boxes slowly, opened one the way you open something you've been bracing for, and looked at the contents without touching them. She said, "He didn't tell me about this room. He really didn't tell me." I said, "He might not have known what was in it. He had the structural drawings. Maybe he knew the room existed, but hadn't accessed it." She said, "Or he knew what was in it, and he couldn't write it in the letter." She picked up one of the photographs, held it face down first, and I could see her deciding something. Then she turned it over and looked at it. It was a photograph of a residential street. Houses, front yards, 2 children on bicycles at the edge of the frame. An ordinary late afternoon, based on the light, the timestamp in the corner, September 7th, 2012. She put it back in the box, face down, and said, "These people had no idea." I said, "No." She was quiet for another minute. Then she said, very evenly, "The micro SD card. The letter. We need to get that out of this shelter before the cleanup team gets here." I said, "The radio's partially reassembled. I think I can restore the transmit function." She said, "Not the radio, the micro SD. Physical. Off-site." She looked at the crawl passage back up to the lower chamber. "The boxes too, if we could. But the card is the priority. The letter names people. The physical documentation in these boxes names, dates and places and dosages. But the letter names people." I said, "How?" She said, "That's what I've been sitting outside your door thinking about for 3 weeks. Day 23. Morning. We worked on the radio through most of yesterday evening, and I got the transmit function restored around 10 p.m. The ribbon cable connection is fragile. I've braced it with electrical tape and a small cable tie that will probably fail under any real physical stress. But it's working. I tested it with a 2-second tone at low power. Clean signal. The question now is range. My antenna configuration is designed for reliable local area communication within maybe 15 miles in optimal conditions, 50 at the upper range if propagation is favorable. I don't know what's within 50 miles that's still receiving. Before the outbreak, there were 3 commercial AM stations and a university FM station within that range. I don't know which of those, if any, are still operational. Last night I picked up a signal. Receive function is also working, which was the pleasant surprise, from what sounded like an emergency broadcast rebroadcast, automated, looping, a standard emergency broadcast format. But the content was different from the initial outbreak alerts. It was requesting survivors to check in on specific frequencies at specific times. A coordinated survivor network. Someone had set it up. or it had been set up before the outbreak as a preparedness protocol, and it was running automatically. The first check-in window listed 7 a.m. and 7 p.m. on 1450 kHz AM. 7 a.m. is in about 40 minutes. Day 23. 7 a.m. I transmitted on 1450 at 7:02 a.m. Faye was watching the camera feeds while I was at the radio. We've established a loose division of attention because two people can monitor different things simultaneously in a way one person can't. At 7:07 a.m., a response. A voice. Male. Older. Based on the vocal quality. Calm in a way that suggested practice. Either he'd been broadcasting for a while, or he was someone who'd been calm under pressure before. He said, "Receiving. Location?" I gave a grid reference, not a street address, a general grid square that placed us within a few square miles without pinpointing the site. He said, "Copy. We're at the university, East Campus, transmitting from the astronomy building. It's the only high ground structure we have. Hold on, background noise, someone speaking that I couldn't hear. Then, we have contact with a federal marshal's station at Claymont, 40 miles north. They're coordinating with CDC mobile response, which is apparently active. Active as of yesterday." A pause. "What's your situation?" I looked at Faye. She'd come over from the cameras when she heard the voice and was standing next to me, close enough that I could see her jaw tighten when the man said CDC. I said, "We have material evidence of the origin event for the outbreak in Hargrove County. Physical documentation and a digital archive. We broadcast the archive 2 nights ago on 3 frequencies. I don't know if it was received." Silence for a moment. Then, "Say again? Origin event?" I said, "The outbreak wasn't a natural pathogen release. There's a private contractor involved. Vertex Bioresearch Group. I'm standing above their storage site right now." Another silence. Longer. Then, "What's your shelter status? Can you hold position?" I said, "We have maybe 24 hours before a cleanup team from Vertex reaches this site. After that, the physical evidence here goes away." The man said, "Copy." I could hear him writing. "Is the evidence secured?" I said, "As much as we can manage." He said, Okay. I'm going to contact Claymont. The CDC team. If they're federal coordinated, they have authority that a private contractor does not. Give me 2 hours." A pause. "What's your name?" I said, "Callum." He said, "I'm Walter. I'll be back to you at 9. Day 23. 9 a.m. Walter came back at 8:58 a.m. He said Claymont had been contacted and was relaying information to the CDC mobile team. The CDC team, which was operating out of a staging facility about 70 miles northwest, had 2 things he needed to tell me. 1, they had received a compressed data file on 2 of the 3 frequencies I'd broadcast on 4 nights ago. They hadn't yet opened it because it came from an unverified source at an unusual time, and they were in the middle of a mass casualty event response. And prioritization had understandably not included mysterious compressed files from unidentified senders, but they had it. 2, they had an investigative team attached, because this wasn't their first indication that the outbreak origin wasn't natural. They'd been getting pathological data from field samples that was inconsistent with a novel natural emergence. They hadn't had a source until now. Walter said, "They want to reach you. They have a vehicle, 1 vehicle, civilian adapted. They think they can get to your grid square in 5 to 6 hours if roads are passable. 5 to 6 hours from 9 a.m. That's 2 to 3 p.m. The Vertex team, 24 hours as of last night, roughly, which means roughly 12 to 14 hours from now. Close." I said, "Tell them to hurry." Walter said, "They know." Day 23. Mid-morning. Faye and I have spent the morning doing 2 things: preparing the physical evidence in the 3rd-level room for potential removal, and working out what to do about the drums. The evidence boxes are heavy, but not immovable. 41 boxes, each maybe 30 to 40 pounds. Getting them from the 3rd level to the main reservoir would require moving them through the crawl space and up 2 vertical shafts, which is time-consuming but physically possible for 2 people. We've relocated 12 boxes to the main reservoir floor so far. Faye is stronger than she looks and has better endurance. Months of outdoor living, apparently, builds a specific kind of fitness that sedentary shelter existence doesn't. The drums are a different problem. 6 drums of 220 liters each, weighing somewhere around 230 kilograms each when full. We can't move them. What we can do is document them. I've been photographing every label, every drum identifier, every structural feature of the lower chamber. Faye is writing a detailed physical description to supplement the photographs. If the CDC team arrives and has any authority to seal and preserve the site, the drums will be here when they arrive. If the Vertex team arrives first, the drums won't be here. They'll take them. The lower chamber will be cleaned out and probably resealed. And unless the archive we broadcast has reached the right people in a way that generates rapid institutional response, the physical evidence will disappear. I keep doing the same math and getting the same answer. It comes down to whoever arrives first. Day 23, 1 p.m. The cameras are showing infected activity near the access road. It's been building since late morning. Individual figures, moving in from the east, crossing the scrub ground between the road and the fence line. Not dozens, maybe 8 or 10, spread across camera 1 and camera 2's fields, drifting. Faye says the infected tend to cluster where there's been recent human activity or sound. The Vertex team's visit yesterday afternoon, parking on the access road, movement, equipment operation, would have left an attractant signature. Today, the infected are following it. If the Vertex team comes back today, they'll be navigating infected to get to the site, which may slow them. The CDC vehicle, if it's coming cross-country rather than using the access road, might have a different approach vector. I told Walter about the infected activity, and he relayed it to the CDC team. Their response was that they had someone experienced with transit through outbreak-affected areas and would assess routes on approach. Experienced with transit through outbreak-affected areas. I've been underground for 22 days, and I sometimes forget that there are people out there navigating this continuously, every day, making it work. It feels like something I should have already known, but the knowing is different from the feeling. Faye is at the camera monitor while I write this. She called out a few minutes ago, 3 more along the fence, east side. Just informational, no panic in it. She's watching them the way you watch weather. Day 23, 2:15 p.m. The CDC vehicle is on camera 3. A dark blue pickup truck, modified. Roll cage, reinforced front end, brush guard. Moving slowly along the access road from the east, lights off. I can see 2 people in the cab. They're about 300 meters out, navigating around an infected figure on the road by going around it slowly. No sudden movement, no acceleration. The figure doesn't respond significantly. It turns toward them, and then loses interest as they pass without sound. They know what they're doing. I told Faye. She came over to the camera monitor and watched for a moment, and then exhaled, in a way that had a lot of compressed relief in it. She said, "Okay." I said, "I need to signal them. They won't know where the access point is." We worked out the signal. Camera 4's flash pattern, the same one Faye and I had been using, aimed at the approaching vehicle so the driver would see it. 5 flashes. Pause. 5 flashes. At 2:21 p.m., the pickup stopped on the road. The driver's side window came down. 5 flashes back from a handheld light. They see us. Day 23, 3:30 p.m. 2 federal investigators are in my shelter. I'm going to write their names down, because names matter. Agent Catherine Wolfe and Agent Dennis Pryor. Both from the CDC Office of Criminal Investigations, which I didn't know existed until this afternoon, and which apparently handles the intersection of public health crimes and federal law. Pryor is a doctor. Wolfe is a lawyer-investigator hybrid, she said, which she described as, "I prosecute public health crimes, which means I know both how to read a lab report and how to get a warrant." They are both notably calm. The kind of calm that is not the absence of urgency, but a studied management of it, because the job requires it, and they've been doing the job for a while. We went through everything with them. The archive, the 3rd-level room, the boxes, the drums. Pryor spent about 20 minutes in the lower chamber with his own collection kit, taking samples from the drum exteriors and the wall surfaces for field analysis. Wolf photographed every box, every photograph, every internal vertex document she could open in the time available. About the drums, Pryor said, these are consistent with what we've been seeing in field samples from Hargrove County. The stabilizer compound, VBRS, would explain why the transmission rate didn't match any natural pathogen model. It was being maintained. I said, maintained by what mechanism? He said, we're still working on that. But the water table here connects to the Hargrove County watershed. If these drums had any leakage, even minor degradation of the seals over 12 years, he didn't need to finish the sentence. The drums weren't deliberately opened. They leaked, slowly over years, into the groundwater, which moved north through the watershed toward the county, where people drank water from wells and from the municipal supply, which drew from the same watershed. Nobody had to open a drum. The drums were always going to leak. The thing that Theodore Brask didn't know, maybe, or couldn't know, maybe no one could predict it with precision, was when. 12 years of slow seepage through imperfect seals, and eventually the concentration in the groundwater reached a level sufficient to produce the pathological response. Nobody chose that timing. But somebody chose to leave the drums here, knowing what was in them and what they were capable of. Day 23, 5 p.m. The Vertex team arrived at the site perimeter at 4:47 p.m. 3 white vans this time, not 2. Camera 1 and Camera 3 picked them up simultaneously. They came from 2 directions, east and south, which was more coordinated than the previous visit. They were not expecting to find a federal vehicle parked at the access point. What followed, and I'm watching this on camera, I want to be clear that I'm watching this through a grainy external camera feed, not witnessing it directly, was a conversation at the fence line that lasted about 12 minutes. Agent Wolf went to the fence. She did most of the talking. The people from the Vertex vans, there were 6 of them, and they'd stopped putting on the hazmat suits at some point between their arrival at the fence and this conversation, did progressively less. At one point, one of them raised a phone to make a call. Wolf said something and he lowered the phone. At 5:09 p.m., 2 of the Vertex vans left the way they came. The third van remained, with 2 personnel, who are now sitting inside the van and have not moved since. Wolf came back to the shelter access. Through the hatch, she called down, "We have a situation. They'll try to get a team back here within 12 hours. Vertex has private security resources, and they'll be on the phone to them right now. I need to make some calls too, and I need your transmitter." She used the transmitter for about an hour and a half. I don't know the full content of what she transmitted. Some of it was on encrypted federal frequencies that I couldn't access even if I'd tried. Part of it was a direct broadcast of a summary she read from notes she'd made in the third-level room, a compressed factual account of the site contents and the documentary evidence. At one point, she read, slowly and clearly, the names from the micro SD card. Theodore's letter, the authorization chain. When she finished reading the names, she put the microphone down and sat at the folding table for a minute. Then she said, to me, "How long did you know about this place before you made it your shelter?" I said, 4 years. She looked around the reservoir, the LED strips, the rubber matting, the hand pump, the shelves. She said, "It's a good shelter." I said, "It was built to last." She said, "Yeah." She picked up her notes and stood. Most things aren't. Day 24. I'm writing this at 6 a.m. It's been a long night. The short version, Pryor and Wolf worked through the night to document and photograph the third level. They have their own equipment, better than mine, field-grade forensic documentation tools. By 2 a.m., they'd inventoried and photographed every item in every box. The physical chain of custody for the evidence is now established in a federal system, which means the boxes themselves are secondary to the digital record that's been transmitted and logged. The remaining Vertex van left the perimeter at around 11 p.m. Whether they're coming back with reinforcements is still an unknown, but Wolf has been on the radio since 4 a.m. and says she has federal authority incoming, specific teams, not just the 2 of them. The infected activity at the site perimeter increased during the night. The Vertex team's lights and engine sounds drew more of them, and by midnight, There were 17 or 18 individuals clustered around the fence line, drawn there, and unable to leave, because they were continually re-stimulated by sounds from the parked van. When the van left, most of them drifted away within an hour. 4 remained by morning. Faye slept for 6 hours last night, which she said was the most she'd slept in weeks. She slept in one of the camp chairs, reclined as far as it would go, with a jacket over her. She looked deeply uncomfortable. She slept like a person who was done. I couldn't sleep. I sat at the folding table and wrote, mostly. Went through parts of this log I'd written in the first days, day 3, day 5, day 7, and read them the way you read something from someone you were a long time ago. The person writing on day 3 was so completely certain about certain things that the person writing today has more questions about. Not wrong exactly, just with fewer inputs. Theodore Brask died thinking he hadn't finished what he'd started. His daughter has been sleeping in a drainage ditch for months to finish it. And I'm sitting here with the key to a place that was chosen for me by a man I trusted, which I turned into something I thought was entirely my own. And it's full of federal agents and evidence boxes, and a woman I'd never met until 4 days ago, who hums while she reads. I keep going back to one thing. The one rule, no one else gets in. I broke the rule. I made the decision, and I broke the rule, and I've been turning it over since, trying to figure out how I feel about it. And the truest thing I can say is, I don't know yet. I built the rule to protect against variables. Faye is a variable. The CDC agents are variables. All of them changed this space in ways I didn't account for. But the space needed changing. Something needed doing that I couldn't do alone, not because of resource limits or decision-making failures, but because the problem was never actually just mine. Theodore pointed me here, but he pointed me here because he thought I was the kind of person who would figure out what to do when the time came. He didn't tell me what to do. He bet that I'd work it out. I'm not sure whether that makes me feel used or trusted. Possibly both. Day 25. Federal marshal vehicles arrived at the site at 11 a.m. 3 of them, with 8 personnel, and 1 additional vehicle that I'm told is an evidence transport. The convoy came from the north, off-road for the last 2 miles to avoid the access road and the infected concentration that was still dispersing from last night's activity. The site is, for the first time since I sealed the hatch, busy. People moving on the surface. I can hear them through the ventilation shafts. Not the sounds I've spent 3 weeks parsing for threat. These are purposeful sounds, organized, boot steps with rhythm, equipment being positioned, voices giving and receiving information. I went up the access shaft at noon for the first time since sealing in. I wasn't prepared for it. I should have been. I'd been watching the cameras for 3 weeks. I had visual data on the surface. But the visual data is flat. It's two-dimensional. It gives you nothing of what being in a space is actually like. When I came out of the hatch, the light hit me like a physical thing. October light, thin and angled, but more of it than I'd seen in 3 weeks. And I stood there for about 30 seconds with my eyes closed, just adjusting. The smell was what got me more than the light. Autumn. Wet leaves. Cold earth. The distant smell of something burned a long way off. The smell of outside, which is a combination of things you can't disaggregate when you're in it, but which your body recognizes as the basic condition of the world, and which, after 25 days of concrete and rubber matting and recycled air, hit me as something almost physically painful. Faye was already up, standing on the drainage berm with her arms crossed, looking east. She didn't look at me when I came up. She was watching a line of infected moving along the access road about 400 meters away, moving away from us, drifting towards some stimulus further east, moving in the aimless way they move when they're not locked onto anything, she said without turning. They're less than I thought. The infected, I mean, there are a lot of them, but in my head there were more. I said, the mind inflates things when you can't see them directly. She said, your mind does. Mine apparently does too. She turned around. In daylight, her face was different from what I'd assembled from hints. The voice through the shaft, the quick impression in the reservoir's LED light. She looked tired in a specific way that has nothing to do with sleep. The way someone looks when they've been carrying something heavy and have just set it down, but haven't yet decided whether they feel better. She said, "I've been out here a long time." I said, "I know." Day 25. Afternoon. Wolf sat down with us both at the folding table this afternoon for what she called a preliminary interview and what felt like the beginning of something very long. She recorded it on a device and asked her questions in the precise, unhurried way of someone who has all the questions written down and is going through them in order. Some of what she asked Faye: how she obtained the Vertex personnel records, the internal emails, the access logs. Faye answered without hedging. She'd obtained some through her father's files, some through formal records requests, some through methods she described as unauthorized digital access, which she stated without apparent concern. Wolf noted it with the neutral expression of someone filing it away for later. Some of what she asked me: how I came to choose this site, my relationship with Theodore Brask, what I knew about Vertex before finding the documents. My answers were shorter than Faye's. The honest answer to most of those questions was, I didn't know. I didn't ask. I trusted the person who suggested it. At one point, Wolf said, more to Faye than to me, "You understand the people named in your father's letter are going to claim the letter is fabricated, that his documentation was incomplete, that the drum's presence at this site was an administrative oversight, not evidence of criminal intent." Faye said, "Yes." Wolf said, "The photographs in the boxes, the exposure documentation, is there any way to trace those directly back to Vertex authorization?" Faye said, "There's a digital metadata trail in the photographs. Timestamps, device identifiers, geolocation data embedded in the original image files. My father copied the physical prints from the originals, which Vertex had kept in the boxes for their own documentation purposes. But the digital originals, I got those through the unauthorized access." She paused. "They're on the drive I gave Callum, in a subfolder marked Source Files." I said, "I didn't go through every subfolder." Wolf said, "That's fine. We have the drive." A beat. "That's actually the cleanest piece of evidence in the whole archive. Digital metadata with device identifiers ties those images directly to Vertex equipment." Faye looked at me. I looked back. She said, "My father was careful." Day 26. They're going to be here for a while. Wolf said the site will be designated as a federal evidence preservation location, which means the drums, the third-level room, and the physical boxes will remain in place under federal jurisdiction. The shelter, the main reservoir, will not be disturbed. She said this in a way that suggested she was telling me something about my property rights, which was a strange concept to sit with after 3 weeks underground. The infected population around the site has diminished significantly over the past 48 hours. The marshal vehicles provided a controlled perimeter that prevented the sound attractant cycle from continuing, and with fewer stimuli at the fence line, the clustered individuals dispersed. There are still infected in the surrounding area. They will be for a long time, is my understanding, but the immediate site is manageable. Faye and I walked the perimeter of the site this morning with one of the marshals. Not very far, staying within the secured zone, but walking outside, on ground, with sky above, was different from 25 days of nothing but concrete ceiling. I didn't say anything particularly profound about it. I just walked. Faye told me, while we walked, what she was planning to do next. She has contacts at 2 independent news organizations, people her father had spoken with before his death, people she'd been building relationships with since finding the archive. The evidence, once released through federal channels, will also go to those contacts. The story needs public pressure to prevent institutional capture. Vertex has legal resources and government connections that could slow or redirect the federal prosecution if it's entirely internal. She's been thinking about this for months. The strategy is her father's strategy, updated and adapted. She talks about it with the measured precision of someone who has rehearsed it internally so many times it's become automatic. I said, "You know this is going to be a long thing. Even with the evidence, even with the archive. These things take," she said. "I know how long these things take. I've been watching them take a long time my whole life." She stopped walking. "My father watched for 20 years before he died. I'm 31. I said, "That's a long time." She said, "It's enough." Day 27. I should write about what the world looks like right now, because I've spent 26 days underground, and my perspective on this is specific, and probably distorted, and worth documenting. What I know from the radio, from Wolf and Pryor's briefings, from Walter at the university station, and from the fragment of information the marshals have shared. The outbreak has affected a geographic area of roughly 800 square miles, centered on Hargrove County, and extending north into the city and south toward the state border. The infected population is estimated, and Pryor said this with the caveat that estimation under these conditions is barely more than structured guessing, at several 100,000 individuals. Active human population in the same area, probably 1 to 2 million, though with displacement and movement that number is fluid. Emergency response has been fragmented. The CDC mobile response is operating but at limited capacity. National Guard units are present in the city, focused on specific zones. There are civilian survivor networks, Walter's broadcast network, similar operations elsewhere, that are more immediately effective for individual survival coordination than official channels. The outbreak is not, Wolf told me, a closed event. The pathogen is transmitted through direct contact, bite or blood contact, and the infected remain mobile for a period of days to weeks, depending on environmental conditions. The rate of new transmission appears to be decreasing as the infected population becomes self-limiting. Eventually, the infected destroy themselves faster than they propagate, but we're not at the bottom of that curve yet. Months, probably, before anything like stability. Months. I have 9 months of food in this shelter. I've been underground for 26 days. Faye's first aid needs have been addressed. The gash on her arm is healing cleanly, and she has no other injuries that need intervention. Where do we go from here? Day 28. I've been in this shelter for 28 days now, and I want to write down something that I haven't found a clean way to say yet. The rule. The one rule. No one else gets in. I broke it. I know that. But I've been trying to understand what exactly I broke. And I think what I broke was not the rule itself, but the version of it that I'd been carrying. The version I'd been carrying was, I'm a closed system. I need no one. The variables of other people are always costs. That version worked perfectly well in theory. In practice, it almost resulted in 6 drums of a biological warfare agent being quietly recovered and erased from history. What the rule actually is, what it was always for, is, I protect this space. I protect the conditions that let me survive. I make the decisions about what comes in here and on what terms. Not no one ever, not me alone forever, but me in control of who and when and why. I made the decision. I let Faye in. The space survived. The decision was mine. That's what the rule was for. I just had the implementation wrong. Day 29. Faye asked me this morning if I had a plan. She meant a plan for after. After the federal process gets underway. After the site is secured. After the outbreak curve starts bending down. Whether I was going to stay underground or whether I was thinking about what comes next. I said I hadn't finished thinking about it. She said, that's fine. I'm asking because I'm starting to think about it. I said, what are you thinking? She said, I have work to do. The media contacts, the supporting documentation. There's going to be a long process and I need to be part of it, not underground. She looked at the hatch in the ceiling, the main shaft hatch, which has been open more often than not over the past few days as people move in and out. I can't stay in a hole. I've been in a hole long enough. I said, this is a very well-engineered hole. She said, I know. I watched you build it. I said, for 2.5 years. She said, your ventilation system is very good. I said, thank you. We sat there for a moment. The battery bank hummed. The pump dripped twice. Then she said, you should come up. When you're ready. The sky's still there. Day 30. Last entry in the main log. I'm starting a new notebook. A smaller one, more appropriate for field work, which is how I'm going to think about whatever comes next. Wolf confirmed this morning that the broadcast we sent on day 18 was received by 4 independent stations, 2 of which were operating within CDC coordination networks. The digital archive, all 847 files, was intact and has been entered into a federal evidence chain. The digital metadata on the photograph files was confirmed as linking to Vertex equipment. The prosecution brief is, according to Wolf's understated phrasing, substantial. 3 names from Theodore's letter have been confirmed as currently employed at Vertex in senior positions. 2 others have left the company since the outbreak began, which Wolf said, again without apparent emotion, is probably not a coincidence. The site is secured. The drums are secured. The boxes are in federal custody. The 3rd-level room has been photographed by a forensic team. The archive is in 3 separate federal repositories and in the hands of Faye's media contacts. Theodore Brask spent 20 years watching this and 6 years building toward it and didn't live to see this day. I've been thinking about what I want to say about him, and I keep landing on the same thing, which is that he made choices I didn't know about, that shaped my life in ways I didn't know. And he did it because he believed I was the right person to put in the right place. And he was right. And I'm not sure whether the ends justifying the means is something I believe in generally. But in this specific case, I'm having trouble arguing that he was wrong. I'm going to be angry about the deception for a while. I already am, in a background way that I suspect will get more prominent before it fades. He should have told me. He should have told me what was in this site, and why he was pointing me toward it, and let me make an informed choice. But he was afraid, Faye said. Afraid that the full truth would make me choose differently, or that Vertex would reach me before I reached the shelter. He might have been right about that too. I don't know. I'll never know. He's gone. And that's the particular frustration of being left something by someone who can't answer follow-up questions. Faye is going up today. She'll be based in the field with Wolf's team initially, close to the site, while the federal process moves. She said she'll check in. I said I'd be on the radio. I'm going up too, today. Not permanently. The shelter is still the safest structural option in the area, and I'll be using it as a base. But I'm going up. I want to stand outside and look at the sky, and not parse what I'm hearing for threat patterns. Just for a few minutes. Just to remember what kind of machine I am when I'm not in survival mode. Walter's broadcast network is still running. The CDC mobile response is extending its reach north, toward the city, toward the worst of the outbreak zone. The infected population is still out there. Still moving. Still the same as they've always been. Stimulus-seeking and aimless and unable to do anything except what they do. They can't plan. They can't open doors they didn't encounter already open. They can't climb a fence that doesn't have a gap in it. They can't think about me specifically or find me specifically. They just move toward sound and away from silence, forever, until something ends them or they run down on their own. The thing about the infected, the thing that's been oddly calming about watching them on camera for 30 days, is how purely mechanical they are. Not malicious, not hunting, just responsive. Sound happens, they move toward it. No sound happens, they drift. There's no strategy in it, no agenda, no thought. What destroyed the world wasn't the infected. The infected are just the consequence. The thing that destroyed the world was a decision made by people in a boardroom who looked at 6 drums of biological material and said, "Not yet." That's harder to defend against than zombies. Much harder. You can barricade a door against something that can't think. You can't barricade a door against the thing that happens when people decide the rules don't apply to their particular project. What you can do, apparently, if you have 4 years and enough concrete and a structural engineer who believes in redundancy, is build a place that survives long enough for the evidence to get out. Day 31. I went up this morning at 7 a.m. I came through the hatch and stood in the cold air with my eyes closed for a full minute and just breathed. Cold October air that tasted like wet leaves and distance, and all the things that compressed indoor air doesn't contain. When I opened my eyes, Faye was sitting on the drainage berm about 20 meters away, eating something from a package. One of the protein bars I'd inventoried when she arrived. The same ones she'd taken from my shelves months ago. She didn't look up right away. The east was getting light, low clouds, breaking in the middle where the sun was starting through, laying a line of pale yellow across the scrub ground of the site. The fence line, the access road, empty. One infected, visible at the far end of the road, moving away from us, slow and directionless. Faye looked up. She said, "You finally came up." I said, "I finally came up." She looked at me for a moment, then back east at the breaking clouds. She held out the other half of the protein bar. I sat down on the berm next to her and took it. The bar was dense and slightly stale, the way they get after a few months of storage, and it tasted like chocolate-flavored cardboard in the specific way that nutrition-optimized food often does. I ate it slowly. The light was coming up. The infected figure at the end of the road had disappeared around a bend. Somewhere in the middle distance, 3 miles, maybe 4, a bird was calling. Sharp, repeated, unconcerned. I didn't ask what she was going to do next. She didn't ask what I was going to do. We sat there on the cold concrete of the drainage berm and ate the stale protein bar and watched the light change, and the wind came across the scrub ground from the east and brought the smell of mud and cold air and something distant burning, and neither of us said anything for a while, and the site was quiet, the way things are quiet after a long time of not being quiet. The hatch was still open behind us. I hadn't locked it. Afterward. No date. I stopped putting dates on the entries when I stopped being underground exclusively. Time moves differently when you have sky access. More fluid, less quantified. The federal case has been ongoing for several weeks now. Wolf calls me every few days with updates. Not because I have legal standing in the case, but because she said, once, in a way that suggested this was a professional courtesy rather than a sentimental one, "You should know how it's going." 3 Vertex executives have been formally named. 2 of them are cooperating, which Wolf said means they've decided that being cooperative witnesses is preferable to being primary defendants. The 3rd is not cooperating. The document archive has been published. The media contacts Faye had been maintaining released it in coordination with the federal proceedings, timed to prevent suppression. 7 different news organizations ran it simultaneously. The story is out. The names are out. Theodore's letter is public. I don't know if it'll matter in the way it needs to matter. Institutional response to this kind of evidence is slow, and the world is still significantly broken in ways that don't have clean resolution timelines. But the story is out. That's what it was for. The shelter is still here. I maintain it the way I maintain anything structural: regular inspection, function checks, supply accounting. Some of the survivors being coordinated by Walter's network have been using the site as a waypoint, sheltering in the main reservoir for a night or 2 before moving on. I vetted the first group carefully, then the second. By the 3rd, I was thinking about it differently. They're not permanent residents. They don't compromise the shelter's function. They're people who need somewhere to sleep for a night, and I have 8 meters of solid concrete, and a working pump, and 19 months of food I was never going to need all by myself. Faye works out of a field location 20 miles north, embedded with the CDC response coordination. She came back to the site last week to collect some documents from the 3rd-level room, the original photographs, which had been returned to her by the federal team after processing. Theodore's photographs. She put them in a flat case and carried them carefully. She said, before she left, "Do you still think the rule was right?" I said, "The rule was right. The application was too narrow." She considered this. She said, "That might be the most engineering-brained thing anyone has ever said to me." I said, "Probably." She shouldered the case. She had a vehicle now, one of the field vehicles from the CDC coordination, battered but running. She got in and pulled the door shut and drove east toward the access road. And I stood at the hatch and watched the vehicle disappear, and then looked at the sky for a while. The sky in late November has its own kind of light, not the October light that was there when I first came up. This is flatter, whiter, without the golden angle. It sits directly above you without the seasonal tilt that made fall mornings look like something being announced. Under that sky, the site was ordinary. Scrub ground, fence line, the standpipe cluster near the ventilation shafts, the hatch in the ground. Underneath it, 42 feet of concrete dome, rubber matting on the floor, 3 LED strip lights, a hand pump drawing up water from deep ground. Everything I'd built. Everything I'd built and everything I'd been pointed toward and everything that turned out to be neither entirely mine nor entirely arranged for me, but something in between, which is probably how most things are, and I'm probably the last person who should be surprised by that. The hatch was open behind me. I looked at it for a moment. Then I went inside and made coffee and thought about what tomorrow needed.